A year or so ago, when I was 19, I was home alone and my dogs were in the backyard. I was on spring break. My younger brother was at his high school. Both of my parents and my uncle that lives with us were working. It was like early afternoon, 12 p.m. when I woke up and went to make my breakfast and stuff. I was watching a YouTube video while eating my scrambled eggs. I don't remember what the video I was watching was about, but I finished eating and went to sit on the couch for like 10 minutes, and then I had the sudden urge to go to the bathroom. I stood up and took my phone with me and started watching another video, closed the door, started doing my business, and at the same time my phone was at max volume. Then, all of a sudden, clear as day, I heard a woman hum outside the door. It sounded like a lullaby. Once again, clear as day, I heard it. It lasted for like 5 to 7 seconds, and I was dumbfounded. I always believed in spirits, ghosts, etc., but I thought logically at first that it could have been the video I was watching. So I rewound it to make sure. But no, that hum did not come from my video. Then I thought it must have been my mom coming home from work early because she does that sometimes. So I called out to her. I stood up, didn't even finish doing my business, opened the door and called out again to my mom, with no answer. I sat back down. I replayed the video a couple more times and once again made sure that that sound did not come from any video or any noise on my phone. So I finished up, flushed, left the bathroom, and looked around the house, checking to see if my mom had arrived and just didn't hear me calling. But she wasn't home. I checked on my 3 dogs, and they were just laying there like nothing had happened. Then I called my mom on the phone and told her what had occurred. She also believes in spirits and said not to worry. I told my brother, and all he said was, "Bruh." Then I told my dad, who is also a believer of spirits, but he takes a more logical view. Like, he makes sure that nothing natural could have caused it, before telling me if the spirit comes back to tell them to go away and ask for the lottery number. I don't remember when this occurred, but I'm pretty sure I was still 19 when it happened. But one night, I was going to bed. Me and my brother share a room. He's been asleep for a while, and I think it was around 1 a.m. You know, that stage when you're about to fall into deep sleep, but you're still aware of your surroundings. Like you can hear things as if you were awake. So right before I fell into that deep sleep, once again clear as day, I heard the same woman's voice. It wasn't my mother's voice, but this time I heard the voice right next to my ear. It was whispering something to me, but I don't recall what it said. But it was perfectly clear, and it was right next to my ear. I instantly woke up and opened my eyes, but there was no one there. I stayed awake probably for another 30 minutes under my sheets before falling back to sleep. I told my brother and my parents the next day of what I had heard, and my mom said that she would see what she could do. Legit, that was the last time that I heard the spirit. So to this day, I'm trying to remember what the spirit whispered. But I just don't know. I don't know if I had sleep paralysis, but this happened almost a year ago. I was sleeping, and then all of a sudden I heard loud bangs. I don't know if it was gunshots or fireworks. I just know it caught me off guard. And then all of a sudden I felt something hit my spine. I couldn't move my legs or arms. I was sleeping on my right side facing my wall next to the window. I kept my eyes closed and I tried moving, fighting whatever was holding me down. Tried kicking. I didn't yell even though I was about to scream so that my parents could come. But then I started to feel my legs again and kept kicking until I had full control back. I kept my eyes closed and fell asleep. I woke up in the morning, wanting to check and make sure that I didn't catch a bullet. But that only happened to me once. Believe it or not, my story is true. My name is Brandy, I am 56, and I live in Washington. All these years, my kids wanted me to write down events that happened to myself and my loved ones. Quite a few members of my family have recently passed away, leaving so many untold stories that I didn't want these experiences to die with me. So for my children, here it goes. A lot of messed up and supernatural things have happened to us in our lifetime, most with witnesses. This is one of them. About 27 years ago, while house hunting for a rental, I met the former renter of this run-down but livable house. She warned me not to live in this house because I have small children. And not only was it run down, it was very haunted, and never, she was stern, never let a man live here with you because he will be taken over by the evil that resides within. Now, I'm thinking she's either crazy or she was just mad at the landlord for something. We needed a home incredibly desperately. I was also thinking that I had lived through worse, and houses could always be cleansed, so I blew it off. I ended up renting the house, but I soon realized that I should have heeded her warning. The house was musty and old, made of wood. The walls, the ceilings, and the floors were all wood. Even the bedroom doors blended in with the walls, but the bedrooms were painted on the other side. There were French doors all along the front of the house going into an enclosed but open-viewed screen porch with a front door. The main living space was long and open. The living and dining area were stretched into one long room, and it was always cold despite having the heater on and it being in the desert. It was located in the high desert of California on the corner of an acre lot of barren desert, and across the street there was a popular grocery store and a few small shops too far away for anyone to hear us. It served as a town hall back in the day, and I think a turkey ranch before that. It was 6 a.m., and we had planned a 3-day trip to the happiest place in the world, Disneyland. My kids, Michael, age 1, Penny, age 4, and Jenny, age 3, were all sleeping on my bed in our bedroom at the other end of the house so I could pack in peace for the trip in the dining room and not wake them. I could see the bedroom door, though, and it was closed. I was standing up folding clothes at the table. My boyfriend's mother, Opal, was sitting across from me when we heard the bedroom door creak open slightly. We both looked up, and it was my daughter Jenny in her little pink and white flowered onesie. I said, "Now you know it's too early, go back to bed." And she replied, "Me up now, Mommy," in her little sweet voice. It made us both chuckle, and I told Opal that I thought she was just excited. I told her no, that we weren't going right now, so please go back to bed. She stomped her foot, which we could feel vibrate through the floorboards. Opal then told me that I had better go and put her back, and I agreed. As I was making that long walk toward her, I was keeping eye contact, and as I was walking, I was telling her, "No, baby," and once again she stomps her foot, smiles, and says louder, "Me up," with the sweetest little smile, and she tilted her head. Opal even muttered, "Aw." It didn't dawn on me at the time how perfect that her little pigtails were. At this point, I'm extending my hands toward her. I get about 6 inches from touching her, and all of a sudden she turned black and disappeared, almost like sand falling to the ground, followed by the door quickly closing behind her. Opal said, "What the hell?" in surprise. Shocked, I stood there with my hands still extended, and then the fear ran through my body like hot and cold needles. My kids were all sleeping behind that door. I grabbed the handle and swung open the door, fearing the worst, only to find my little Jenny fast asleep with her sister's leg over her. Whatever we had seen, it couldn't have been her. Although unsettling, Opal and I didn't talk about what had happened, and later that morning we all piled into the car and went on our trip. We had a great time, but when we came home we were met with all of the lights on and old music playing loudly coming from inside. People were standing around in my living room. 2 separate groups, like 2 different periods of time. I turned to my boyfriend and asked how those people got in and if he left the door unlocked. He told me, "No, why the hell would I do that? You saw me lock it." We all got out of the car and cautiously approached the front door. As I got closer, I could see a couch not where our couch was, with a man in a white tank top sitting there. He was dirty, and he was looking at this boy standing in the corner with such hatred. You could tell the boy was abused by the way that he was standing there with his head down. That's when he looked up at me, and it pierces my soul even now just to think about him. The kids were scared, and the dog was growling. I grabbed the doorknob to put my key in. Just then the music stopped, and the lights went out. We opened the door, and nothing had been moved, and no one was there. I couldn't get the image of that sad-looking little boy out of my mind, and it was a while before I saw him again. It was a nice day. My boyfriend and his mother were still at a doctor's appointment, and the kids and I were out grocery shopping, having a good time. I usually kept the living room light on when I knew that we were going to get home after dark. I didn't realize we would be gone that long, and it was just starting to be dusk. I pulled into the gate, and I think the kids were a little too rambunctious, too much spare change, quarter machine candy, I guess. I sat for a moment, planning my attack with getting all these groceries, a sleeping baby, and the two girls up the steps and into the house, when I noticed movement in the living room. No one was home. I could hardly even see anything in there because the light wasn't on. I started to get out when the girls jumped out of the car and started running for the steps. I yelled for them to stop and ran over to them. We could hear noises like a child running around, and my eldest daughter to this day says that she saw a little boy and describes him to a T. But at that moment I thought that it might be an intruder or something like that. 3 steps went up to a landing, a locked front door opening into a windowed, screened-in porch, and then the 3 French doors. I told the kids to go to the car, but they were too scared to leave my side. Both of them were clutching the back of my shirt. I armed myself with a huge stick by the landing and forged on. I burst through the front door to the porch, and he was there, his face in his 2 hands cupped against the glass, as if he was peering out, and then he vanished. It was the boy that I had seen standing in the corner before. We went inside and I searched every room with my obviously frightened children practically glued to my side. There was no one there. Was my mind playing tricks on me, and I was projecting my fear onto the girls? I turned on all the lights and ran out to get my sleeping baby and the rest of the groceries out of the car when I stopped in my tracks. There on the glass were 2 crescent moon handprints, and it was fogged up where his nose was. It stayed there for at least 20 minutes. Just to add my own thoughts here, I don't feel that we always need words to communicate with spirits or for them to get a message to us. They are not bound by flesh. It is important that you have an open mind and always keep your will strong. At night, you could look out the French doors at the stores across the street and see the vast desert behind them. The property was pitch black, so you saw the reflection of yourself and whatever was behind you. That night, everyone was asleep. It was nearly Christmas, so I was admiring the lights decorating the storefronts when I felt one of my children through the floorboards skip up next to me, and then I heard a faint giggle. I felt a tug on my shirt, so I turned my gaze to the reflection, extending my arm over as if to caress the back of his head and pull him in next to me. It didn't occur to me that this was not my child. He came in under my arm and stood there looking up at me, and all I could feel was love and sorrow. I turned to look at him, but he was gone. So I looked back at his reflection, and it was gone as well. He was about 7 or 8 years old. He had what looked like black and white Converse on, and was wearing old jeans with rolled-up cuffs. I could see the edge of a white t-shirt under a light gray sweatshirt, and his hair was sandy blonde and wisped to the side with the sweetest smile. In that moment, I felt everything that he was feeling, and I cried. I saw the images of abuse flash through my head. I don't want to elaborate on that, and he made me feel that the man was not his father, and that he loved the comfort of our presence. There were so many emotions. I went to bed and held my kids tight. I was so full of questions, like what happened to his mom? How did he die? I looked for records and was told that back in the day there were not many records kept out there in the desert. A person could live and die, and no one would know unless it was specifically reported. I felt whatever else was in the house was evil, and we found out just how evil it was the longer that we lived there. I feel I should describe the bedroom so that you can get a feel of the surroundings. On one side of the room there was my full-size bed against the wall and a single bed next to me against the other wall, separated by a small nightstand with a lamp where my 2 little girls slept. The door to the living room was next to their bed, and at our feet was the hall door and closet. Many nights, we would see the light beneath the door get blocked out, as if someone were walking up to my room just standing there, and then they would fade away. At first we thought it was just Opal going to the bathroom, since it was right next to our room, but we found out later that it wasn't her, because she was frail and had to use a potty chair in her room. The dog would sometimes growl and scratch, but when we opened the door to the hall, no one was ever there. Almost every morning at 6 a.m., we could hear the lid to the toilet slam up and the toilet flush, but when we ran in there, the lid was down and the water was still. A phone would start ringing in my room despite us not even having one, and we would hear old music coming from the walls from time to time. At first, we thought that it was coming from the pipes of our neighbor or something like that, but we didn't have any neighbors because the lady had already moved out, and that house was completely empty. So many things happened there, but this night in particular caused me to never let my girls sleep in their own bed alone. The girls were so happy that day. They had both received a package from my mom full of princess stuff. Toys, cups, and bowls, 2 beach towels, and 2 nightgowns embossed with their favorite princess images. The nightgowns were short and silky, and after their bath they begged to wear them to bed, so I happily complied. It was quiet in the house that night. Opal was with family along with my boyfriend, and I don't remember where the dog was, but he wasn't present anyway. I tucked them in, oldest by the wall and youngest closest to me on the outside. I wasn't ready for sleep, so I put a scarf over the lamp to dim the light, so that I could still read. Now I was sitting on my bed next to them, and as I was reading, the covers slightly came down off of the girls. I didn't really think anything of it, because my oldest daughter was notorious for kicking off the blankets, so I tucked them both in and continued reading. It happened again, and once again I covered them back up. At this point I was starting to feel uneasy, and the hairs on my arms were beginning to raise. Never a good sign. I looked at my oldest daughter and noticed that she hadn't moved. So how was this happening? I sat back down on my bed and pretended to read while intently staring at the covers over the book pages, feeling my heart pound through my chest. Moments passed, and I felt myself trembling, trying to hold the book steady, and then it happened. I saw the covers start to move, but the girls were still. I was confused. I didn't understand what was going on. The covers were then pulled down with force, so I leapt up and grabbed the covers from the end of the bed, pulling them up. At this point I was standing next to them, and my voice quivered as I yelled at whatever was in the room to stay away from my girls. I still don't know who I was yelling at. I sat on the bed next to them, gripping the covers tight, when they were jerked from my hands down to the foot of the bed, exposing my girls' legs. My youngest daughter's nightgown started to rise up to the top of her thigh. She started to scream and grabbed at her leg as if she were feeling pain, waking her sister. I threw my body over both girls and screamed at whatever it was to get out and leave us alone repeatedly. I tried my best to calm the girls down and protect them. We stayed huddled together all night. This was the last time they slept alone in that house. I was able to get a bigger bed, and we all slept together from that point forward. At this point, I'm sure you're wondering, why didn't we just leave? Believe me, I wanted to, but I felt trapped. Not just by the house, but also by my boyfriend. Let me start by saying that Bill was not the nicest man. Oh yeah, from the outside he was great. He had a charming voice, and he made people laugh. Nobody thought that he was capable of doing the things that he did. They didn't know him like I did. I feel he tricked me when we first got together. I was young and impressionable. He knew I had low self-esteem, so he made me feel like I wasn't good enough for anyone else and was lucky to have him. We had children together. I knew what he was capable of, and let's just say that I didn't want to lose anyone I loved, so that's why I didn't leave him. But this was different. This was not him. This was an entirely new level of evil. I started noticing a shift in him the longer that we lived in that house. We stopped going out as a family, and he stopped working. He put bars on the windows and one-way locks on all the doors with only one key. Not even his mother cared. She would go into her bedroom and shut the door so that she didn't have to hear me scream or our children cry when he sometimes hit me. And like always, he made me feel like it was my fault. Living there changed him, though. The things he started to do were out of his character, and that made me more uncomfortable. He started watching me from dark rooms and behind cracks in the doors. When I asked him why he was doing this, he got mad and made me feel like I was crazy. When we were alone together in that house, it was even more intense. One such night the kids were at my mother's, and we had just finished dinner. We were sitting together on the couch watching TV, and I was mending a sock. It had been a pretty good day. I noticed a change in the atmosphere, and for some reason he seemed to have gotten quiet. I was just about to ask him if he wanted me to change the channel when a small flash of light hit my right eye. It wasn't until shortly after trying to find the source that I realized he was staring at me the whole time through a little piece of broken mirror in his right hand, hidden by the throw cover. My God, those eyes weren't his. I know him. This was not my person sitting next to me, and I was frightened to the core. He didn't even realize that I saw this, so I sprung up. His mom just had a phone installed, so I'm trying to call my mother and check on the kids. He jumped and hid the mirror in the couch cushions and started trying to reason with me as to why I should come back and sit down next to him and not make that phone call. I noticed that while he was talking, he wasn't even looking at me. He was looking behind my head, almost as if he were looking through me. I glanced at my reflection in the glass door, but nothing was behind me. I grabbed the phone and called my mother, assuring him that I was only going to be a minute. We stayed on the phone until he fell asleep, and quite a bit longer. My mother knew what was going on, but she felt helpless, as I did at that time. He got up, grumbling something as he walked into the bedroom to go to sleep on the bed, so after we hung up, I stayed awake with the blanket on the couch covering everything but my eyes while listening to him breathe until dawn, when I finally fell asleep. There was another time at around 4 p.m. We needed some groceries for dinner, so I got the girls ready and left my baby boy asleep in his playpen in the living room. Opal was napping at the dining room table, and my Bill was sitting on the edge of our bed in the bedroom. I called out to him that I was leaving, and to keep an ear out for the baby, but he didn't respond, so I repeated myself, and I heard him mutter, "Yeah, sure." So we left. The store didn't have something his mother wanted, so I had to go to 2 stores. It had just gotten dark as we pulled up, and I could hear the baby crying. I rushed in, and Bill's mother was still sitting at the table. I picked up my son, and he was soaking wet, and it looked like he had been crying for a while. I was changing his diaper, trying to calm him down, and the whole time Opal was getting mad at me for leaving her alone with the baby. I was furious, and I told her, "I didn't. I left him with your son." She looked surprised. She didn't even know that he was home. What the hell? Where was he? I put my son down and told the girls to go play. Something wasn't right. I didn't think he was still in the bedroom because the lights were off, but someone was in there. It was abnormally dark. I slowly went up to the door and walked in. There was a dim light coming in through a crack in the blinds, and I saw his silhouette still sitting on the bed. He hadn't moved. His feet were on the floor, and he was slightly hunched forward with his elbows resting on his legs, cupping his hands together. The room smelled stuffy, and the air was thick. I called out his name, but he didn't reply. Once again I called out his name, adding, "You're scaring me." I moved closer, saying, "Why are you not answering me?" I saw that he was sweating and that it was glistening in the light and dripping from his head to his hands and then his hands to the floor. I could hear it as it dripped. I was shaking while I slowly made my way around him to the lamp, and I heard a growl that almost sounded like it was coming up from the floorboards. I turned the lamp on. His shirt was soaking wet. There was a pool of sweat at his feet, and his eyes were darker than I've ever seen them. His stare was fixated downward. I was afraid to get near him, but I felt like he needed my help. I started to shake him while calling out his name. He was cold to the touch. I crouched down in front of him between his legs, but honestly, all I wanted to do was run out of that room. I took his face in my shaking hands and said, "Please, Bill." Just like that, he snapped out of it. He grabbed both of my wrists and hurled me onto the bed behind him. He said in a loud voice, "What are you doing, you freak?" Then he got up and went to the bathroom. I heard him turn on the shower as I laid there curled up, not knowing what had just happened. I soon composed myself and went out to bring in the groceries and make dinner. Later he joined us as if nothing had ever happened, but I still felt uneasy. The night went on, and he was his old self, goofing off with the kids and watching cartoons. I went into the kitchen and started washing dishes with my back to the hall. I heard him in the living room with the kids. I swear, I heard him. The next thing I knew, he was behind me, and he aggressively grabbed my waist and put his mouth on me. I could feel his teeth on my neck. I jumped. He startled me. Then he looked at me like he wanted me dead and said, "You disgust me," and left the house. I don't know where he went. I didn't ask. All I know is that he was gone. He came back later that next morning, dirty, and saying something about him getting lost in the desert. I remember him telling me once that I could scream out there and no one would hear me. We eventually got out of that house after living through horror, not knowing from day to day what was going to happen next, and who was safe from that evil. Later, after his mother had moved into her daughter's house, she passed away. I felt bad because I wasn't even sad about it. I found a way to leave Bill. I made an excuse that I needed to pick up a check from the welfare department, and that I had to bring the kids with me. After I got there, I told them that I was being abused, and they helped me find a safe place to go. After I didn't return that day, a detective from the sheriff's department came and asked me questions about him, because apparently he stole a child and took her to that empty house. Thank God he was caught before he could do anything to her. I never let him hurt my children, but sadly, they remember him hurting me. For years after that, I would have nightmares of him appearing at the foot of my bed, clawing his way up my legs, and closing the space between our faces with his cold breath on my lips, and those eyes. I would wake up gasping for air. About 9 years ago, I looked up his name, and found him on a website exposing predators. I still shiver when I see small mirrors or broken glass. A few years after we moved out, I ran into the former renter, so I asked her if she knew anything about a little boy ever living there, or did someone die there, and she said, now this is not fact. She said that she heard, I don't know where though, that there was a boy and his mother disappeared, leaving him with his stepdad, who is horribly abusive. Later, the boy was found stuffed in a hole on the property, dead, and they found the stepfather's dried and decayed body on the couch in the living room. He had committed suicide. Like I said, I don't know if that's true, but it seemed pretty damn close to how I felt. I wish even now that I could have helped that sweet little boy move on. We couldn't even drive down that street for years after that, and we all cried with relief many years later when we found out that the house had been demolished to the ground and that a housing tract was being built over the land. I still wonder if those people living there are plagued by the same evil that plagued us. This is from 2015, but I really remember it like it was yesterday. It happened in Yokosuka, Japan, while I was stationed there with the Navy. I was out during the day walking and exploring Tokyo, and when I finally went back to the base, I didn't want to return to the ship for the night, so I stayed at the Navy Lodge on base. It had an open floor plan, so the only doors were the front door and the door to the bathroom. I had just went to sleep when I woke up randomly and I had sleep paralysis and couldn't move. I could only move my eyes to look around the room. It was like something was holding my body to the bed. Then I saw and heard the front door open and the light from the hall start to creep into my room. Then I saw and heard the front door open and the light from the hall start to creep into my room. The door slowly closed, and then I saw a big shadow figure with white, glowing eyes move from the front door kitchen area on the right over to the living room on the left, slowly moving and keeping its eyes locked on me at all times. As it got around the corner to the living room, it stayed there for a few seconds before peeking its head around the corner and staring at me again before hiding back around the wall. I woke up and was able to move again, so I jumped out of bed and ran around the room, turning all the lights on, trying to find whatever it was, but nothing was there. I laid back on the bed and tried to fall asleep again, and almost as soon as I closed my eyes, it happened again. I couldn't move and could only look around the room. The thing then moved from the left from the living room to the right again where the bathroom was, and continued to stare at me with its white, glowing eyes the whole way. It opened the door and triggered the motion light in the bathroom. The light had a creepy blue glow to it that I still remember vividly. As it disappeared behind the wall again, it once more peeked around the corner, staring at me with its white glowing eyes for another 5 to 10 seconds, before going back into the bathroom and closing the door behind itself. I woke up again and jumped out of bed and ran around the room looking for it, leaving the bathroom the last place that I would check. I could see the blue motion activated light on in the bathroom from under the door. I finally threw the door open and went inside, throwing the lights on, and nothing was there. I went back to my bed, laying down again and trying to sleep, just hoping that I was imagining all of it. Then it happens again, but this time it feels like something is covering my mouth too. I can hardly breathe as I see the bathroom door opened, letting the blue light seep into the rest of the room as it moves around the corner staring at me with its white glowing eyes, as this time it moves to the foot of my bed, standing there for a few seconds and then, almost as if it's extending its body, stretches all the way to where it's only a few inches away from my face, staring directly into my eyes with its own white, glowing ones. I'm trying to flail my arms and scream out at it to leave, when I'm finally able to get out a "fuck off" before it disappears right in front of me. This is a series of events that occurred when I lived on a plot of farmland a couple of years ago. I was pregnant with my daughter, and my boyfriend worked late at night, so I was home alone a lot. Things were okay for a while, but as time went on, it started feeling strange in the house. I always felt like I was being watched while in my bathroom and the hallway right by it. I started feeling uncomfortable around windows at night. I figured I was just scared of being there alone. One of the first strange events happened while my boyfriend and I were in bed. While watching TV, I saw the door handle to our room slowly turn as if someone were about to open the door, but then it turned back. It caught me off guard, and I was trying to get my boyfriend's attention, but it stopped when he finally looked. Things began falling off the surfaces outside where my boyfriend would go to smoke cigarettes. He told me he would feel breathing on his face while in bed. He told me several months after it started happening, thinking that it would freak me out if he told me. He's not the type to jump to it's a ghost conclusion. After I had my daughter, I was even more scared to be in the house by myself. I even began locking myself in our room every single night. One night, I was waiting for him to come home from work. It was around 3 a.m. I heard the door handle jiggle as if someone were about to come in, but then stopped. I figured my boyfriend had to use the bathroom or something. After waiting for about 10 minutes, I called him asking why he didn't come in yet, and he told me that he wasn't even home. My friend came over to hang out with me and my daughter. I was changing her while my friend was in the other room. I heard someone say, "Hello?" And I thought it was my friend, but she said she heard it too, and that it wasn't her. I would get my friend to come pick me and my daughter up frequently when my boyfriend was at work because I was so afraid. One night, I had an overwhelming feeling of danger and had them come get us. I was taking my daughter's car seat out to their car, and it literally felt like someone yanked it down and out of my hands. I didn't drop it. I don't know how to explain it, other than to say just that it was yanked or jerked down. I hated being in this house. I can't even explain the feelings that I felt all the time. I was just so terrified, and I'm so happy to be out of there. We moved away 3 years ago. On moving day, my boyfriend told me there were garbage bags at the top of the stairs that were placed in a way that they weren't going to go anywhere. But as he and his brother were loading up the last bit of stuff out the front door, he saw these bags come tumbling from down the stairs. My bland storytelling does my emotions no justice. I've never been so scared just to be in my own house every night. As soon as the sun would set, the whole vibe would shift. I thought I was crazy. I was getting angry and upset far too often over nothing. I honestly dread the idea of ever going through something like that again. When I was 3 years old and living with my mom at the time, we bounced around a lot from house to house. We ended up moving into a house that was just a few blocks away from my dad. I just want to state that these are my very first memories. I don't remember anything before this house. That's how traumatic that it was for me. But I'll do my best to explain these experiences in an adult version because I was 3 at the time and still hadn't learned to talk very well. So we move in, and I don't remember anything out of the ordinary happening right away, but soon I would start seeing this red man, or bad man, or fireman. My mom told me that's always what I would call him, because I have very little memory of what I would call this thing. I vividly remember it wanting to hurt me. I don't know how I knew, but I knew that I wasn't safe every time I saw him. Sometimes he would chase me down the halls or come through the walls, and I would run to my mom trying to explain what was happening. My mom said that I would run up to her crying and shaking, saying that the bad man was trying to hurt me. This thing kept going on, and eventually something else started happening. Every time this red man would try and hurt me, this new entity would show up. I say entity because I couldn't tell its gender, and I don't remember it having a face, but it was like it was a glowing ball of light that would chase away the bad man every time he was around. This went on for months before I finally moved in with my dad. Because I was so scared constantly, I actually developed a stutter and my whole body would tremble. One day while living at my dad's, I was drawing and my mom asked if I could draw what I was seeing. I was drawing in a coloring book, and one page had an angel on it, and I started drawing circles around it because I couldn't actually see what it was. In my mind, it was just a big ball of white energy. I'm not Christian and don't believe in angels or demons, but I do believe in negative energies and positive ones that could maybe manifest into ghosts or spirits. So at this point, I had permanently moved in with my dad. I went to speech therapy for a long time to fix the stutter, and now, even to this day, my hands shake. Apparently, it's called trauma tremors. After moving in with my dad, my mom and brother, who had never seen anything weird like I did, just saw my reactions to it. Both started experiencing things. Not as bad as what had happened to me, but still creepy as hell. My mom would start to hear the piano play, and my uncle play the piano, so she thought that it was him playing it, until she walked over there and realized that no one was in the room. My brother would see shadows and lights turn off by themselves, but that's all that really happened to them. My mom eventually moved out of that house because too many things were going on and she really was getting creeped out. Me and her moved into a trailer, and the first night there, I was laying in bed with her, and I was apparently staring into the bathroom. I don't remember this, but my mom does. And she asked what I was staring at, and I said, "There's a man standing in the bathtub." And she then asked, "Is he a good man or a bad man?" I said, "A good man," and went to sleep right after. We later found out that the owner of the trailer before us was an old man who had died. Ever since then, I've never seen any paranormal things, but I can still sense if houses have good or negative energies. Believe this story or not, but it was very real to me and has permanently given me a tremor. When I was older, probably around 7, and could fluently speak, my family asked me if I remembered what had happened at the house. I guess they thought that I forgot or had made it up, and I told them the story in astounding detail, and it freaked everyone. Me and my mom occasionally talk about this from time to time because we still don't know what had happened. We just know it did, and that it was messed up. Before we begin, you must understand that everything you are about to read is absolutely true, and the events continue to this day. It was last summer. My girlfriend, now wife, and I finally made the big decision to move in together. Cobblestone Square is a situation of apartment complexes surrounding a central park. After living in another apartment for 2 years, I learned that a bigger apartment was opening up on the other side of the complex. We needed more space because my wife had 2 children from a previous marriage. After a rushed inspection, we were happy to move in right at the start of June. The months passed by, and the days grew shorter and colder. Autumn was drawing to a close, and with it, that's when the trouble began. In all the stories and movies, it starts out small. Things moving from place to place, lights being left on, etc., all chalked up to forgetfulness. This was true in our case, and we didn't think much of it. It only started to escalate with the children. Our apartment is set up with 2 bedrooms and bathrooms on opposite ends from each other. In our bedroom, we have our own private bathroom, and next to the kids' room is a small hallway leading to their own bathroom. We would give them baths in there and potty train, and almost as if flicking a switch, when the autumn months came, our youngest, a 2-year-old girl, would absolutely hate going in that bathroom. At the mere mention of bath time, she would go into hysterics, or on good days, she would sit in the tub, and in the process of bathing, she would look past myself or my wife and start screaming and crying. Oftentimes something would catch her eye in the mirror, and she would also start crying like mad. The most unsettling part would be that as soon as we took her out of the bathroom, she would stop and act as if nothing had happened. Our son, who was 4 at the time, would also run up to us and say that he would hear a voice saying, "Uppy," which was a common saying among the children when they wanted to be held. We asked if it was his sister, and he would profusely say that it wasn't, but he said it sounded like a kid. This happened a few times. With my wife being separated from her first husband and splitting custody, we would have the children come live with us every other week. On the weeks that the kids would go stay with their dad, the activity would seem to die down, but that didn't mean that it wouldn't happen at all. I asked my wife what she remembered from last year, and she recounted a time when we didn't have the children and she was cleaning the house. She noticed the kids' door was open. We usually keep it closed, but she thought maybe I had went into their room for something. She checked to see if I was inside, and seeing that I wasn't, she closed the door and didn't really think anything of it. It wasn't until a while later that she went to use the kids' bathroom and saw that the door was open again. She found me in our room and asked if I had opened it, and I said that I hadn't. With more incidents of lights being found on and doors opening, it all came to a head near the end of October when I was washing dishes in the kitchen. Above the sink, facing the living room, is a small window that allows someone in the kitchen to look out into the dining room and the living room, and additionally the back door, which is a sliding glass door. Important detail. After the kids had been put to bed and were asleep, my wife and I went about our normal duties and chores, trying to finish up before the next day started. As I was washing dishes, I looked up from the sink and saw in the glass of the sliding glass door the reflection of a large shadow in the hallway to the kids' bedroom. It quickly entered the bathroom, and I immediately walked over, turning on the light, and seeing nothing there. I went to my bedroom where my wife was vacuuming, and I asked her if she by chance went into the kids' bathroom for whatever reason. I wasn't surprised by her response when she said no, and I told her what I had seen. It was after this event, and subsequently Halloween, that all the activity seemed to stop. More months passed by again, and we jumped to 2020. August. As soon as the activity started again, I began to keep a journal of all the findings. That way there was a record. On August 10th, I went to the bathroom, the kids' bathroom, before going to bed, and heard a small child giggle. Both children were fast asleep. On August 11th, my wife was bathing our daughter, and for the first time in a year, our little girl started to shriek in fear until she was out of the bathroom. On August 13th, while getting ready for bed, our son knocked on our door. I'm always the one to answer, and he told me that he was afraid. He wouldn't elaborate on why, but when I laid him down in his bed, he begged for the closet to be closed. The closet has never been a problem, and a few nights after this we returned to it being opened and haven't experienced anything like it again. On August 15th, my wife and I had an argument, and I went out to the couch to sleep for the night. As I was tossing and turning, I heard a child's voice in the night say, "Uh-huh," as if answering a question. I didn't react, and forced myself to go back to sleep. Both myself and my wife have caught our son speaking to himself as well. My wife told me that once she heard him saying, "Ow, stop it, you're hurting me," and when she went to go check on him, he was in the hallway by the kids' bathroom, holding his arm. During the daytime, the kids were playing, and both me and my wife were doing our own thing. As I was sitting on the couch, our son runs behind the couch and stops, and then says, "And how would you do that?" out of the blue. I turn to him and ask him who he's talking to, and after a moment's hesitation, he says, "Nobody." I told him I heard him say something, and he then insisted that he didn't say anything. On one occasion, my wife was sleeping on the couch, and in the middle of the night heard a man's whisper say, "Don't get up," to which she promptly obeyed. It was the night after that I woke up from my sleep in bed to see a shadow shape standing over me with piercing red eyes. I felt as if it was going to hurt me. My wife and I have naturally begun our interest in the spiritual world. We began researching and looking for ways to go about this. We've purchased a Ouija board with no results, and from a medium, a supposedly haunted ring. If our apartment was going to be haunted, we wanted to know by who and with what intention. It seems as if our mail-order ghost has already made their home, as one morning our front door was unlocked and slightly ajar, with nothing stolen. Tonight, as I write this, my wife and I were watching TV on the couch and decided to call it an evening. But as we got to our bedroom, I noticed a low scratching sound coming from the record player. I opened it up and saw that the turntable was moving as the needle was off its holder, turning the record player on. I replaced the needle and tried knocking the player a few times to see if it could have been easily bumped or knocked off, but no. The only way to move that needle was to pick it up with your fingers and set it down. I was reminded of one other time that this happened, long before we bought any haunted items. I am thoroughly convinced that my apartment is haunted. People die in them way too often to think it's not a possibility, and if nobody died here, the cemetery across the road definitely doesn't bring me any comfort. I can say that two distinct entities can be somewhat accounted for, a small child ghost and something else. Or maybe something that wants to be viewed as a child. But let's think happy thoughts. We still live here to this day. Autumn is just beginning, and that's when things really seem to get interesting. Back in the early 80s, my then boyfriend moved into an apartment in Brockport, New York to be closer to his college. It was a nice 2-bedroom. The building was about 5 years old. It overlooked the parking lot of some plazas with a burger monarch that he worked part-time at. Every night, from the time we moved in until I moved out, I had one of 3 creepy dreams. One involved being back at my parents' house, where the stairs up to the attic are in my closet, and either an infestation of snakes or something oozy and rotting was sort of schlorping its way to the stairs to make its way down. The second dream was of being lost and unable to find the apartment building. The big kicker dream involved it being moving day, and as I walked around trying to decide where to hang the spice shelf, I noticed black and red writing and smears on the walls. I remember thinking to myself in the dream that they should have been painted over. The night before I moved out, the dream continued with me being in my bedroom, and there was a guy in a hooded robe standing and leaning against the doorframe watching me. I woke up when Keith got home from his work shift, and he asked me why I didn't wave back. See, he had one of those great hooded velour bathrobes, and he had waved at a hooded figure in our bedroom window, thinking that I had gotten up to watch for him coming home. I wasn't standing there, and wasn't even awake. When we were moving out, him back to the dorm and me to a different branch of my company, we found a little medallion with some of the glyphs that I had seen on the wall in my dreams. Luckily, who or whatever it was didn't follow me, and a friend warded the heck out of my new bedroom. So my brother had an apartment right next to my mom's. I was staying the night at my mom's, but me and my brother decided to watch a movie at his apartment because he has a bigger TV, and my mom had already fallen asleep. Anyways, we watched a movie or two, and eventually he went to sleep, and I did too not long after. So the dream, or nightmare, started with me laying down in my brother's spare room on a mattress on the floor. And someone had just walked out of the room, so I was alone, and I started looking around. I looked at the closet door, which was right in front of my mattress, and I started staring at the open closet door, when out of nowhere, an all-black face peered around the corner and was staring at me. I had 3 brothers that would all mess with me, so in my dream I started mocking the thing in the closet, and I was saying stuff like, "Oh ha ha, so scary, nice demon impression," and stuff like that. I kept mocking it because I thought it was one of my brothers trying to scare me, and out of nowhere it got super cold, and my chest got super heavy, and the thing in the closet jumped out on all 4s and started hissing. I can't really describe the noise it was making, but it sounded something like a cougar screeching and a snake hissing at the same time, and it was very blood-curdling, and it makes me shiver to talk about it. Anyways, when this started to happen, I began to lose my breath as if it were sucking my soul out of my body, and then it just stopped and crawled back into the closet very contortedly, and I woke up. I was very calm when I woke up, but I had cold sweats, and I was very confused. I sat up on the couch and looked at my brother, who was sitting right next to me, and I told him the whole story, and he was silent for a good minute. My brother told me that he's had multiple dreams like that, and that my mom has too, and he said that he has always had a bad feeling when close to that room, and that he always woke up in the middle of the night thinking that he was being watched. Fast forward to a few months back, and my brother was moving out, and me and my other brother got stuck cleaning that room. I always got a bad feeling when my brother would leave me in there alone, and the room was colder than the rest of the house. I haven't had a dream like this since, but then my other brother, whom I haven't spoken of yet, just had a dream similar to mine, and it made me think about it all over again. I have had dreams about ghosts before, and they're all very vivid, and I get the same feeling in all of them. I suspect that I have a demon following me, but I have no clue where it is from. I started to think I had the same demon as my brother and mom, but they have way worse nightmares, and theirs are way more vivid, and they see an actual demon, and not just a figure. The next day, after I had that nightmare, my brother bought sage and salt and started to spread it around his apartment. He also got holy water and put that out too, and drank some of it with me and my other brother. Ever since then, I haven't had a nightmare, but I have had some where I get the feeling that I felt when I had the first nightmare, but they usually go by really fast, and I typically just pray in my sleep, and it goes away. If anyone else has a story about their first experience with sleep paralysis, or simply just a vivid nightmare, feel free to share it. There's always going to be people that will have experienced what you have experienced. I had a weird series of encounters as a child in my hometown that I have since moved back to, and I just chalked it up to sleep deprivation mixed with having a vivid imagination. This first one happened when I was really little. I'd say in 2004 maybe, 2003. I suck with dates. This was one of the first experiences that I had, and it's pretty fuzzy. All I really recall is being at the top of a flight of stairs and jumping down the whole thing, almost as if I could float down. I looked back on this one and I thought that maybe I had fallen down the stairs and just didn't remember. But in that case, I would have gotten a ton of scrapes and bruises because it was a big wooden staircase. Likely not related to the other experiences I had, but still, weird. There was some weird stuff in between these two, but I'd rather just get to the meat of it. Anyways, here's the biggest one that really bothers me. When I was in middle school, I was incredibly rebellious, and decided to try running away from home in the fall of 2014. I got up in the middle of the night and just decided to walk straight down the road. Not sure what my plan was there. Anyways, I ended up following the highway until I ended up around Thunderbolt, east of where I lived, and was stupidly proud of myself for not chickening out, and that I'd stopped crying. Anywho, I wandered some more, hopped some fences amid my adrenaline high, and ended up in these dense, really trashy woods. I started thinking over things, and crying again. Then I heard what sounded like my mom calling out my name from up on the highway, and instinctively ran away from it. I remember looking up to the highway and just seeing a person go limp and fall off the side and under the overpass in my direction, then start running toward me on all fours like some kind of creature. It was super dark, and I couldn't make out any features at all, and I wasn't interested in getting closer. So I just ran like the damn wind until my legs were shaking and I sat down in the underbrush. I was resting for a bit and still shaking and crying and all that. Then I heard my mom calling my name again. It sounded like it was the exact same volume, like it was from the same distance away. It almost sounded like a mosquito buzzing super quietly in my ear. I passed out for the night and then found my way back home in the morning. I thankfully ended up getting home safely, and all I got was bars on my window, scolding from my mom, and a sandal to the head. Oh, and sleep paralysis just about every night of my life since. This happened about 7 years ago, and still creeps me out. My husband and I were living in this little above-garage apartment that only had like 4 little rooms. It was built in the 1920s. There were a lot of strange occurrences in the apartment before this event, but I thought nothing of it. My husband was in college at the time working on his associate's degree. Neither of us was working. I had no cell service at this point, and my husband's phone was our only real working phone. I had a phone with no service on it except for an internet service called Magic Jack, so that I could call out when he was in class in case I needed help. If it went to voicemail, it would record everything. This is important to this story. One morning he calls the Magic Jack line to check in on me. He heard the line pick up, then nothing but static. Next morning, my husband had woken me up before, as usual. It was a day off for him. He wakes me up in hysterics. Something had been captured on the line. He played it for me. There was a very clear growl, and then a voice saying what sounds like, "Leave," very gravelly and angry. Up until this point, my husband didn't believe in the paranormal. He was made a believer that day. Have any of you had something like this happen to you before? How did it change your outlook on the unknown? For context, I don't normally have a problem with sleep paralysis, and actually had to look it up to see if that's what I experienced. This past Saturday evening, my wife and son went to her mom's to use the pool and ended up staying late. I was home alone. I did some chores and ended up downstairs with the AC on and watching TV. I wasn't physically tired from chores, which was putting a load to wash, taking out trash, and cleaning up the kitchen counter. The next thing I know, I am deep asleep, although I'm mentally awake. I try to move my body and cannot. I can think like I'm awake, and I can hear myself groaning. I can see my room, and I'm lying on my sofa. It's dark outside, and I have the overwhelming feeling that there is someone in the room with me. I'm struggling to wake myself, and I can't. I know I'm laying on the sofa. I can hear the TV. I have consciousness of my surroundings, yet can't shake myself awake or move my body. I have this terrible feeling that there is someone on the other side of the room. My den is very long, with a family room attached to it, but I can't move my body to see who is there. I get the feeling like if I don't move, something bad is going to happen. I'm eventually able to shake myself awake and have movement of my body again, yet the room seemed brighter, like if it wasn't as dark as when I was trying to move myself awake. I don't see anyone there with me. The TV is still on, and I know that it was the same program that I heard in my paralysis state. The second episode happened last night. My son was in our bed, so I went to his room to lay down as I got tired of him taking over the bed. I was watching YouTube, the lights were off, the bedroom window was open. I somehow passed out without even realizing that I had fallen asleep, and had another episode of sleep paralysis. I'm lying there. I can hear the fan and the iPad playing a commercial between videos. Again, I get a sense of foreboding. Someone is at the window, then something moved in the room. I think the closet door creaked. I'm trying to shake my body to move, and I can feel my heart pounding. I eventually make my leg move off the side of the bed, and I must be making grunting noises and trying to move my foot to touch the floor. Then I'm able to turn over, and I sit up. I haven't had a lot of experiences with this before, and it almost felt like something else was controlling it. Not like drugs, as I don't do drugs, nor alcohol, as I haven't had a drink in weeks. It was almost like hypnotism or something controlling me to fall asleep so quickly and so deeply. This is a real story in this area. People actually report seeing this. It's a tale that comes from a little town in Lancaster County, a place called Elizabethtown. It's called the Purple Light Bridge, and it's a story that began in the early 1900s. Could be more than a tale, though, since there is proof of the purple light and the tragic incident behind it. So one of the tales is that a young boy is struck by a train on the bridge that intersects between Turnpike and Road Street, which is where the train station for Amtrak is. It supposedly happened in 1934, and some people claim that there is proof of the accident. So after the boy's death, it is said that late at night you can see a purple light on the bridge or in the gorge where the train track ran into from the north heading southwest. People like to argue that you can see the light at another location, and that it's been there not only by the train station itself. They claim that you can see the lights under the bridge that is above the train tracks on Bossler Road. Bossler Road, for this purple light, had another tale. A mother brought her son to the bridge, and under that bridge, she hung her son, and then herself. Locals say that the purple light that you see is the mother and the son, as one energy. Some people have claimed that the purple light comes from the moonlight reflecting off of the rocks below. Yet even more people claim that it's actually the bridge a couple miles away in Newville, near Elizabethtown. I have not yet tried to investigate, but certainly intend to. My partner and I had just become parents, and were looking for our first home. We found an older house built around 1910-1920, which seemed perfect. It was next to a good school and close enough to family that could help out with our daughter. Everything seemed great for the next couple of years, but there was always a heavy type of atmosphere that was hard to explain. And we had this feeling like we were being watched all the time. My wife was the first to notice it, and I would always brush it off as if there was nothing to be scared of. I always carried that mindset, as I was highly skeptical of any type of paranormal activity, And I always trusted the whole if you can't see it, then it doesn't exist paradigm. How wrong I was, it turned out. The initial signs were that things would go missing and then suddenly turn up in the most peculiar of places, like photos and my watch, which ended up in the bathtub. But most of the time, things seemed to find their way into the wardrobe that was in the master bedroom. Once my daughter woke us up in the night to tell me that someone had just walked out of her window. As she grew up, she would complain that the man was in her room and she couldn't sleep. I was still not believing that this could be a ghost, so I would comfort her and stay with her until she went back to sleep, and I watched a black-like shadow thing, which I can only describe as darker than the shadows around it, move from the corner of the room and out of the window. I went back downstairs and sat on the sofa, where the deepest growl I ever heard happened, which completely took me by surprise, as it sounded as if it was right behind my ear. I nearly jumped out of my skin and thought I needed a drink. I went to the kitchen and I could hear laughter in the living room. I couldn't think of any logical reason for it, so I went back upstairs and sat in my daughter's room again for the rest of the night. But nothing more happened. Eventually, things escalated to the point where every night around 2 a.m., you would hear walking up and down the stairs so loud that we nicknamed whatever it was Mr. Boots. When my daughter was around 10, we would get massive bangs in the middle of the night. When it first happened, I honestly thought we were being burgled. I would run down the stairs only to find nothing, not a thing out of place. I had the plumbing checked and electrical, but all was good. Then, one night, I fell asleep downstairs, and an inflatable hammer flew at the TV, instantly waking me with the noise because it had a squeaker in it. I again was trying to work out how that had happened, and whilst I was thinking about it and looking at the hammer on the floor, it started spinning really slowly. I jumped up and walked to the kitchen, and again I heard the laughter. I then heard the boots on the stairs, and my wife suddenly comes down the stairs, woken by a really bad nightmare. While we were both talking in the kitchen, we heard the laughter again. Not long after this, we couldn't take it anymore and left, but I have hundreds of weird encounters, and I can honestly say that this house turned me into a believer. I always wondered what it was that was in that house. Ghost, demon. We still talk about that place now and then. And probably always will. I am aware of sleep paralysis. I understand your brain can project things, etc. I'm not denying that. That is what possibly could have happened, but damn did it scare me, so I'm going to tell you. Now, I have had sleep paralysis a fair few times in my life, but this is the scariest thing that I have ever experienced during a sleep paralysis episode. One night I woke up during a quite peaceful sleep. Across from my bed is the TV and, of course, a wall behind that TV. I opened my eyes and instantly noticed that I was in sleep paralysis. I worked on moving my fingers, but I heard something. It sounded like something floating, like ooh, ooh, ooh sound. Being on my stomach, I could see across my room, which was my TV. The wall behind that TV, I shit you not, was all of a sudden a window. I didn't see it change into a window. It was already a window when I looked at it. I start breathing heavily. The sound is getting closer, and the brightest light that I have ever seen shines into my room, but not enough for me to lose vision. A UFO just floats by my window. Meanwhile, I'm still telling myself to move and not freak out. It continues to pass. until I see it slowly backing up outside the window. I'm still trying to move. The UFO sits there. I try calling for my housemate, which of course doesn't work. I feel something malvoyant at the end of my bed. I see a tall, dark shadow, and as it reached out to grab or touch or whatever it planned to do, I shot up from my bed, absolutely the most scared that I had ever been. I was breathing heavily, and when I did shoot up, the window became my wall again. There was no sound. Most of my sleep paralysis episodes, I don't usually remember falling asleep. But this night I didn't go back to sleep. In August of 2013, I visited the small town of Cloudville, Louisiana, to investigate the cellar of a tiny, abandoned farmhouse. I was drawn to this place because in 1932, a woman was murdered here, and in 1933, her husband mysteriously vanished. While this situation alone was not of particular interest to me, the story surrounding it captured my attention. The following is the history behind the haunted candle of Cloudville as I have come to understand it. In 1932, the farmhouse was owned by Adam and Emily Benoit. Adam was a farmer, a hard man, and not a particularly likable one. Although he did run a successful farm, he was also an alcoholic and spent most nights at the local pub. His wife Emily was a quiet woman who had no social ties, and instead spent all of her time at home, alone. In June of 1932, Emily was found murdered in the cellar. Police records state that she had been struck from behind with a blunt object. They were able to determine that she did not die immediately. She had crawled from the place of impact to the back of the cellar. In her outstretched hand was a candle holder. It would have been the only source of light. Adam Benoit was naturally listed as the primary suspect, but he had an alibi. He was with his friend that night at the pub. The friend was a local drunkard with a less than stellar reputation, but nevertheless, Adam's alibi was accepted. The murder of Emily Benoit, to this day, remains unsolved. Early in February of 1933, Adam Benoit was reported missing. He had not been seen at the pub for several days, which was very out of the ordinary for the recent widower. Police investigation led to the cellar in which Emily had met her demise. The lead officer wrote that he had heard a man sobbing, but he found the cellar to be empty. The only sign that anyone had been there was a single candle burning against the back wall. The officer also wrote that upon extinguishing the candle, the sobbing faded. It's also in the record that the police officer found the word alone carved into the wall. The whereabouts of Adam Benoit also went unsolved. He was never seen again. The following year, in 1934, the farmhouse was purchased by a man named John Morrell. When he was not seen or heard from in several weeks, police officers once again were led to the cellar to investigate. They found the exact same candle flickering dimly from the shadows. The officers once again reported hearing a man sobbing and noted having seen the outline of a female form in the weak light. When the candle was extinguished, the voices stopped and the woman's shadow disappeared. Once again written on the wall was the word alone, only written out 3 times rather than just the one. Like Adam Benoit, John Morrell was never seen or heard from again. The farmhouse to this day, still in his name, fell into disrepair. When I visited the farmhouse in 2013, I had every intention of exploring the cellar. The building had long been abandoned, so I broke the lock and cautiously ventured inside. I found everything to be completely untouched. Dusty wine bottles still filled the shelves. Old, rusty tools were piled in a corner. At the back of the cellar, I found a candle covered in dust and burned almost to the end. All over the walls of the cellar, across the ceiling, across every inch of surface, was the word alone. As I had expected, the word was written in two distinct styles, and I had come prepared. I compared the writing to that of Adam Benoit's journal, as well as John Morell's signature on the deed. I'm no expert, but the two styles appeared to me as identically matching the samples that I had brought with me. There's no way that this wasn't the writing of the two long-banished men. In my curiosity, I lit the candle. Softly at first, then growing louder and louder, I heard the sobbing, the sounds of loss, of despair, the weeping of those abandoned to an eternity of nothingness. And in the shadows, the figure of a woman slowly drifted into view, dancing toward me. I quickly extinguished the flame and left the cellar. But of course, I brought the candle with me. The haunted candle of Cloudville has sat quietly in my collection for several years now. Only once since that day have I lit the flame. I was in my attic among my collection, and almost immediately I heard the quiet sobbing of 4 souls lost in time. I snuffed out the flame. The next day, carved into a rafter in my attic, I discovered a single word. You guessed it. It said, alone. You have no reason to believe me, and you probably won't. I don't care. I just need to speak my truth, as it weighs on me sometimes. Since it happened in July, I told myself that I would take it to my grave out of fear. Fear of my significant other, family, and friends thinking that I'm crazy and ostracizing me. I have no history of mental illness, and I don't take meds, but I also just don't want to scare them. In July, around 10 to 12 a.m., I went to the kitchen with a blanket over me to grab a fork and a drink. I was carrying the drink in my right hand and the fork in my left as I struggled to keep the blanket wrapped around me. As I was heading back to the living room, I realized that the downstairs light and the ceiling light were on. I turned off the downstairs light with my left hand and looked to confirm that it was off. The ceiling lights were closer, so I continued on to turn the ceiling lights off behind me while looking down the stairs. The ceiling light flickered and burnt out, and I froze. A blue light appeared at the bottom of the stairs, and I cried, but it wasn't out of fear. I was already in a good mood, and it felt comforting. I stared, and tears continued to pour down my cheeks. In awe, I walked left past the corner and stood there and continued to cry. For 3 minutes I stood there like that, questioning what I had seen. It appeared instantly after the lights burnt out. Could it have always been there? Who knows? I doubted my sanity, and by the time I went back to look down the stairs, it was gone. As much as I try to forget, the emotional attachment to what happened always helps me remember. I had to make a decision that night. Carry on with my life, or keep asking questions that I didn't have the answers to, and let it consume me and destroy me. I accepted that I may never know what it was, just that it is my truth, and I don't want to be afraid to share it. I used to work as a cleaner when I was 16 and between colleges. This is the UK, so I had already left school. The place where I worked was a popular clothing store near my house and was built over ancient farmland. There were also rumors of druid burial grounds nearby, but that's another story. I've always been sensitive to the paranormal from a very young age, but this was by far the most haunted place I've ever worked, and my first apparition sighting. We were a team of 4 to 5 people, and all of us were assigned to different parts of the store. One of the sections was the women's fitting rooms. We would vacuum the rugs and cubicles, polish the mirrors, and all of that. You would hear high heels on the tiles the whole time that you were down there, and the sounds of rustling paper, coat hangers rattling, that kind of thing. There was also a general feeling of discomfort and unease, as though you were being followed and watched. This is hours before the store opened, so of course there were no customers. Sometimes a manager would be there, but they stayed upstairs in the office. The next part was the men's clothing area, which was on the 2nd floor. When you cleaned there, you were alone but for the occasional manager walking through. One time I was on the floor cleaning the railings by the cash registers, and a huge black shadow swept over me. I was surprised because I hadn't heard anybody approach, and as I looked around, I was definitely alone. My cleaning routine was to sweep the floor and collect the dirt into little piles around the pillars, then sweep it up all in one go at the end. The dirt piles moved constantly. I would go back to do the final big sweep, and some of the piles always would have disappeared. After I clocked out, the piles would be there again. I had a sense that the spirit was a young male farmhand who was very mischievous. I said as much to my coworker, and she told me that she refuses to clean in that area after polishing the mirrors one day and seeing the disembodied head of a young man peering over her shoulder. Aside from my instances with the piles, I would always hear the sound of coat hangers rattling and shuffling noises, but I never felt threatened by it. I used to laugh it off or just tell the spirit to stop, and he would most of the time. Now, after the store was clean, we would clean the staff quarters. Toilets and canteen, meeting rooms. The toilets were a non-paranormal horror in themselves. Note, I worked here with my mother. We were assigned to clean the female toilets, and usually if someone was using them, we would leave and give them privacy until they finished. So we went in, the middle stall was closed, and we heard rustling paper and heavy breathing. So we left and waited. And waited. And waited. The cleaning cupboard was right next to the toilets, and didn't even have a door. We would have seen and heard anybody who might have left. To leave and enter the toilets, you would have to walk straight past the open doorway and then walk down the corridor that directly faced it. It was an L-shaped corridor, with the toilets on the far end and the cleaning cupboard on the corner. Except when we went in after waiting 10 to 15 minutes, the middle stall door was wide open and empty. Now, on to the apparition. The children's clothing area was generally less creepy. There were coat hangers moving again. Sometimes things would fall off the shelves and rails, but we always just shrugged it off. The elevator was directly opposite the children's clothing, and we usually loaded our cleaning equipment into the elevator because it was too heavy to carry up the stairs. I remember rinsing my mop out, and I glanced up. There was a little boy around 6 or 7 years old, standing directly in front of me. He wore a flat cap, a pale shirt with suspenders, dark shorts, and socks up to his knees. At first I thought it was a mannequin, and when I blinked, he was gone. I thought I was just tired, and I shook my head. I spoke to my mother about it later, as she's Wiccan and super into the supernatural, and I described the boy to her. She had seen the exact same child a few weeks before, but only the back of him, as if he had been walking around a corner. She told me that she had the feeling he had died of lung-related issues, perhaps tuberculosis or pneumonia. So there you have it. Some of it can be explained by tiredness, I know, but I just thought I would share this experience. So it was around May of this year when I was playing hide and seek with my family. When the game started, I went to the basement. But after a couple minutes, I was about to be spotted, so I moved to the bathroom, but went backwards into the bathroom. Keep in mind, I was facing the doorway, and that is when it started. When I heard the groans, I froze. They didn't sound human, so I knew it wasn't one of my family members. A couple of minutes went by, and I could still hear the groans, but built up the courage to run out of the bathroom. A couple of more minutes went by. I could still hear the groans, and I had to build up the courage to run from the bathroom. That's all I have to share. If you could explain what happened, then that would be great. My great-grandmother died in that house. It was built in the 1940s, and that basement bathroom was built very poorly. My late mother told me her ghost stories from a time when she worked as a charge nurse at a well-known hospital in my state. Please forgive me if the story is hard to follow, as she told me this when I was a kid. In the early 90s, my mother was fresh out of medical school and was fortunate enough to find a job at a prestigious hospital. The only downside of taking this job was the fact that she would be working the graveyard shift. A typical hospital night shift is 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. A couple of months into the job, she found out that one of her good friends from medical school had gotten a job at the same hospital as her. Unfortunately for my mother, her friend had gotten a day shift. On this particular day, my mother's friend ran into some car trouble and couldn't get a ride home. My mom, being the helpful person that she was, told her friend that she could pick her up and take her home before her shift started. My mom picked her friend up and took her home. Her friend was thankful for my mother and insisted that she stay and eat some dinner. My mother couldn't turn down the offer as she had rushed out of the house to go and pick up her friend in the first place. My mom and her friend sat at the dining room table eating dinner. In front of the table in the family room was a large fish tank. Looking at the tank, my mother noticed that all of the fish were pressed up against one side of it. She wasn't really bothered by this, but asked her friend, "Did you forget to feed your fish today?" "Why?" "All your fish are out and pressed against one side of the tank." My mother's friend looked at the tank and laughed. "Maybe it's my uncle. The fish would do that when he would look through one end of the glass." "I thought you mentioned to me that your uncle had passed away when you were in medical school?" "Yeah, sometimes I think he's just standing there looking at the fish, or maybe I'm losing it." They both laughed it off and finished dinner. My mother thanked her friend for dinner and left to make it to work on time. My mother was less than a mile away from work when she saw blue lights in her rearview mirror. She thought to herself, was I speeding? Did I forget to signal? Did I accidentally run a stop sign? All of this ran through her mind as she pulled over. The police officer came out to the car and up to the driver's side window. He shined the flashlight in my mother's eyes and asked for her license and registration. And then, the usual, "Do you know why I pulled you over tonight?" "No, sir." "Well, the person in the passenger seat is jumping around and clearly isn't wearing a seatbelt." "How can that be?" My mom confusingly looked over to the passenger seat, and of course, the seat was empty. The officer shined his flashlight into the car and froze. My mom turned to look at the officer, who was visibly shaken and pale. After a few seconds, the officer began to mutter, No, not today," and slowly paced back to his car. In a flash, the officer took off. Must be Uncle, she thought. My mom arrived at work and started with her normal routine. The night shift didn't faze her until around 12 a.m. While finishing some patient paperwork, out of the corner of her eye she spotted someone walking around in a patient gown. Concerned, she nudged one of her coworkers to check on the patient who was wandering around in the hall. He got up, looked down the hall, and immediately turned around back toward my mother. There was no one there. Confused, she looked over the desk, and indeed, there was no one there except other nurses and doctors. At around 2 a.m., my mom had gotten tired and decided it was time to get some coffee. She got up from her desk and began walking to the break room. On her way to the break room, she spotted the patient, the same patient wandering around the hall. Not wanting to disturb the other patients and nurses, she decided to follow this patient. She followed them until they turned and walked into one of the rooms. She walked up to the room and looked in, expecting to find them. Instead, she walked into an empty cardiology room. My mother walked out and began to think that she was losing her mind. Before exiting the room, she looked at the room number and saw that it read 616. She wrote it down on a notepad and continued with her shift. When her shift ended, she began to put away her work in her locker and pulled out her notepad. She looked at it, and it read Cardiology 616. Remembering what had happened, she used the break room phone and called her friend. Half asleep, her friend answered. My mom began to explain what had happened to her and mentioned her experience with the police officer and her shift at the hospital. Finally, my mom asked, "How did your uncle pass away, if you don't mind me asking?" "Oh, he was having some heart problems and passed away from a stroke." "When you visited him in the hospital, can you recall what room he was in?" I think it was room 616. "I think it was your uncle I saw last night and this morning." "No kidding." My mom always told me that story, and she truly believed that she had seen her friend's uncle's ghost. Though the ghost said nothing to my mother, she could only ponder the reason why. One night, I was working a night shift in a refinery. I was working as a quote-unquote hole watch for my shift, which means I basically sit at an entrance and document anyone that goes in and out. Well, a guy showed up, I got his name, and he gave me the company that he worked for, so I logged him in. Everything checked out, so I'm waiting at the entrance for a few hours for the guy to come back out. Now, that's nothing unusual, because most of the people that go in will stay in there between 2 to 6 hours at a time, and every hour or two I yell up to make sure that they're okay. I would yell, and usually the guys whistle back or make a noise to let me know that everything's alright, and every time I check, I thought I heard a response. A few more guys came up to go in. I logged them in, let them know that there's another guy up there doing inspections. They go in and radio back, "Hey, there's no one in here." Immediately, I had a weird feeling because I was at the only exit entrance, so there's no possible way to get out of the container without me seeing. The way the container is set up, you have to climb up a ladder to get into it from underneath using a scaffold to help. I was sitting on the scaffold far back enough to where if anybody came out, they would drop down right in front of me, and the only way off of it was to go through the gate opening that I was guarding. So I radioed my foreman and explained to him what had happened. He got into contact with the company, and they had no one by that name, and no one scheduled to check that particular container. I was completely baffled at this point. Here I am, adamant as ever that someone went up into that container. I thought I was going crazy, and I was also a little weirded out. I had a signature on the log where they sign in, and I have to sign right next to their name also, acknowledging that I know that they're going in. For about 20 minutes, I'm in full panic mode and freaking out because I don't have an explanation as to what happened, or where he went, or who he was. And on top of that, I could have easily lost my job because of it. At the time when this happened, I was around 12 years old, living with my mom in a run-down apartment complex. The building we lived in was the smallest of the three in the complex, and it was shaped like an L, with our apartment being closest to the inside corner on the shorter side of the L. To our right was one other apartment with another single mother and her son, who was much younger than me. Below us was a family with 2 kids that I was friends with, and the apartment above us was empty. It wasn't the nicest area, so after dark we kept our windows and doors closed and locked. The reason I'm going into such detail is so that you can understand why I believe that this voice didn't come from anywhere other than in our apartment. We were up late one night. It was around 11 p.m., and my mom was looking at something on her computer. She and I would typically stay up late hanging out together, so this was completely usual behavior. The computer was tucked into one corner of our quote-unquote dining room, basically just a patch of linoleum off from the kitchen, and our living room was to our backs. We didn't have the TV on, nor did we have any other lights on other than the one in the dining room itself. I can't remember what we were looking at, but I do recall this sudden feeling that we were being watched. Many things that I attribute to unexplained paranormal activity happened while we were living here, so the feeling of being watched was incredibly uncomfortable, but not anything out of the ordinary. As I was beginning to shift in my seat to turn and look around, we both heard a sinister male voice say, "Meow." Conversation level, neither a whisper nor a yell, drawn out in an exaggerated, almost lilting tone, as if it were mocking us. I would say it took around 2 to 3 seconds for this voice to finish, and in that time I was able to feel every hair on my entire body stand on end. We immediately spun around, me nearly falling out of my chair to the floor, both of us nearly hyperventilating in absolute terror. My mom said something about, "If you aren't good, get the fuck out," or something to that effect. I'm honestly not sure how I slept that night, or any of the other nights we were there for, but we never heard anything like that again. I am a 26-year-old female who has been having constant dreams where someone grabs me by my ribs and their fingers sink into my body. They're pushing and pushing their hands into my ribs, and I'm crying out for it to stop, and it hurts for real. A crushing pain makes me want to curl up and beg for it to stop. It's the real deal. In one specific scenario, in a dream, I gasp and sit up in my bed. This is the dream, remember, so a lucid dream, if you will. I sit up in my bed, and I am scared of my room. I grab the blanket closest to me and realize that it's at that stage of early morning where the sun will be coming up soon, but hasn't quite just yet. I feel this terror for some reason, and then a man suddenly comes into my room. He's in a long, blank t-shirt. He's bald and scary with bloodshot eyes, and he's pale and just... He looks at me instantly and rasps, "Don't think I haven't forgotten what you owe me." I swear, I can never unhear this. And then he jumps on me and instantly starts to dig his fingers into my ribs. I can't even explain how bad it hurts and how it can feel so real. I'm wincing, I'm trying to shrink into myself, make the pain stop. It's so bad I can barely even beg to stop it, but nothing stops it. Until I finally wake up. I sat up in bed and prayed that it wasn't going to happen again, and just turned on the light. The sun was coming up anyhow, and I didn't want to be in bed anymore. Of course, I was slightly anxious about turning the bedroom door corner in case that thing was real. Anyway, I have a lot of sleep paralysis issues, but this was the first of these pain in the ribs dreams. Now I have a few from time to time. Just the other night, I was in a prison and someone attacked me and jabbed my ribs, holding on to me tight and just repeatedly jabbing and holding my ribs hard as I was praying for it to stop and begging for them to stop and crying. I don't know what it means. Also, I'm totally healthy, with no pain in my ribs or anything like that in daily life. Am I being attacked by a spirit? Is this really something? I work in a pharmacy that's located inside a nursing home, and I've been working there for the past 4 years. Just a note to mention, I've had many prior paranormal experiences in my life, but this is still ongoing. I've always felt a presence since the first week that I started, but it was never anything that made me feel threatened. Things didn't really start happening until last year, when I was talking to my coworkers about feeling a presence, and asking if that was something that they had experienced as well. The day after I had a conversation with my coworker, I was working a night shift. On our night shifts, there's only one technician and a pharmacist. I was sitting at the back counter on my computer when I thought that I had seen someone come through the door. We're usually not busy at night, but there is the odd time when one of the nurses will come down for a bag of chips or a pop. I got up from where I was seated and walked over to where our cash register was, and from there you can see the pop coolers and the chip racks. I couldn't see anyone, so I left and walked back and forth, looking down the aisles. Nobody was there. I asked my coworker if he had seen anyone come in, and he said no. But I was 99.9% sure that someone had walked through that door. I didn't think much of it. It was late, and I decided that I was probably just tired. I sat back down in my chair and started filling prescriptions. About 25 minutes later, I looked up and saw a pack of toilet paper slowly moving forward to the edge of the shelf before it dropped on the ground, startling me. There's absolutely no way that it could have just been our air system or a draft that had knocked it off. My coworker saw this too, and also thought it was odd. I told him it was a spirit that moved it, and he looked at me like I had 5 heads. So, to prove my point, I brought up the security camera footage. On the video, you can see 2 bright and fairly large orbs moving around as the toilet paper was being moved. I showed it to him, and there was no denying that it was a spirit trying to make itself known. That was my first significant paranormal experience at the pharmacy. We've had things go missing only to find them in the strangest places. For example, my car keys went missing one day from my locker, only for me to find them in with the prescription vials. My coworkers all swore up and down that nobody had hidden them there, and I most definitely didn't. Things are always falling off of the shelves, and sometimes they're heavy items, not just something light like the toilet paper incident. We had a 5-kilogram jug of Epsom salts crash onto the ground and break open, and no one was even remotely close to the aisle. Many of my coworkers and I see what looks like someone walking by out of the corner of our eye, only to realize that no customers are in the store. We also hear what sounds like the door to the front entrance open and close, and nobody is coming in. This happens multiple times a day, sometimes. The only time I've ever felt threatened or scared so far was when I was working the night shift and got locked in the bathroom. It could well have been a hardware malfunction, but I don't believe that it was. The handle locked from the inside, and I don't normally lock it anyways. I did my business, flushed the toilet, and washed my hands. I went to exit the seemingly unlocked door and felt that it was being held shut from the other side. I figured it was just my coworker messing with me, so I started yelling his name, and that it wasn't very funny, and to let me out. The handle started moving as if someone was on the other side, wiggling it. I yelled again for my coworker, and he must have finally heard me because I could hear his footsteps. He asked what was wrong, and then pulled the door open with ease. He's now finally starting to believe that I wasn't crazy, and that this place actually has some paranormal activity going on. This happened last night. I am currently car camping. I woke up last night for a whiz, and while I was doing my thing, I could see a floating, irregularly shaped light off to my left, about 2 meters, 6 feet, away. I didn't feel scared, more of a what is that kind of feeling. I'm trying to think of the best way to describe this, so please bear with me. Its appearance was kind of like a parallelogram, except the short edges were jagged and ripped into 2 long appendages. It was kind of a milky white in color, with no light emanating from it. It floated in a straight line and came to a tree where it did 3 little hops and then disappeared around the tree. I finished my business, but didn't have my phone. I did have a flashlight, so thinking it was someone in the trees, I shone the beam through the trees, but nothing reflected back. I turn around to go back and get in the car, and the light thing is dancing around the back of my car, right beside me. I was able to walk up to it and try to touch it. I say try because my hand just touched the car. But the even weirder thing was that when I touched it, my hand created a shadow over the top of it. It was like it had no feeling at all, like just going through air. After it floated around the car, it disappeared around the side, and I lost sight of it altogether. I climbed back in the car for sleep, but was incredibly baffled, and prepped my phone just in case that thing floated through the window. About 5 years ago, I had just moved into a new house with my wife at the time. We had 2 kids, ages 2.5 and 1. My 2.5-year-old was very articulate for his age, and so one day as we were walking out the front door, he points across the house and asks, "Mommy, who's that little girl right there?" Well, my wife and I just kind of froze, because he was the kind of kid that had never made up any imaginary friends, or anything like that. But the moment passed, and we kind of forgot about it. Around 6 to 8 months later, I remember I was in my bedroom late at night. I have a large window in my bedroom that looks out into my backyard. I also had a couple strings of lights overhead that illuminated the yard perfectly. One night I was up studying for a class the next day when I looked outside and saw that my kid's swing set had one swing going back and forth in a perfect pendulum motion like someone was on it, while the swing next to it was dead still. This was not the first time this has happened. It was actually the third, I think. But it was the instance that I remember the most clearly and took the most notice. I honestly have no idea why I didn't think to tell my wife or to take a video, but I just stood there in the window and watched it for a couple minutes, and it kept up perfect consistency. I grabbed my flashlight and walked out to my deck to get a better look. Still swinging. I had been studying lots of science classes at that point, so my head was in the space of, I'm going to figure out the rational explanation of why this is happening. It was breezy out, so I walked up to the swing set and held my hand in different places around the swinging swing, and no breeze. Plus, again, the swing next to it was dead still. Also, my thought was that if it was the wind, there was no way that it could keep a perfect back and forth motion. If a swing gets even a little off, it would have collided with the one next to it. Anyway, I'm not sure if I had a previous encounter with my son in mind or not, but I had a very certain feeling at that moment that there was a little girl swinging on the swing. almost like I could see her, but obviously couldn't. I also felt very at ease and not frightened at all. Then, after about 5 to 10 minutes, I stopped the swing just to see what would happen, and it remained stopped. I remembered apologizing out loud to the girl for stopping the swing, and told her that she could swing whenever she wanted to, but it never happened again after that, and I haven't had any additional encounters at this house since. I looked up public records and asked the landlord if there was ever any little girl that had died in this house, and nothing. The only info that I could collect is that a few years before we moved in, there was an elderly woman who lived here for about 20 years, but the owner had the landlord kick her out in fear that she would die on the property, so she had to move in with family a few states away. Anyways, I would love to hear your thoughts on this one. While going through a tough time in my relationship, I decided to move in with my mom for a few months for a break from the chaos. A guy I had met through a mutual friend of ours offered to pick me up in his truck and take us for a drive through the mountain trails behind my mother's house. Bored out of my mind with TV and food, I agreed. He arrived, I got in. We drove to the top of the ridge at the beginning of one of the trails where we stopped to roll up really quick. 5 or 10 minutes later, we were slowly driving along, listening to music, talking, laughing, realizing that we had actually been neighbors years before. The song on the truck radio was changing, and there began a softer song. We could hear the wind blowing quietly through the trees, and all of a sudden there was a whisper. "She's with him," the voice said, extremely clearly. I did not know what to do. I mean, what were they talking about? And even more importantly, who were they? We continued to drive down a trail a bit longer because my guy friend said it would be bad not to show dominance to whatever it was and not to run scared, ever. But it was, in fact, the scariest moment of my life. I should clarify also that this is in the middle of nowhere in the middle of nowhere. My mom has no neighbors for miles. Hunters are allowed on the property, but none were in the area. We shined headlights in the direction of the whisper, and there was nothing. About a month ago, I started a new job doing security at a local community college. Being the new guy, I was pretty much shafted with the night shift right off the bat. Normally, I work from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. on weekdays, and 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. on the weekends. It's a nice job, good pay, plenty of overtime. The campus doesn't have dorms, and I'm the only one here at night. It gets lonely and very quiet. Watching the security cameras is monotonous, and patrolling the empty dark halls can only be done for so long before boredom really starts to set in. When I first started, I had the expectation that I would be given the worst shift at the worst times, and I was right. I was put on the night schedule before I even got to see the place, really. It used to be an old Catholic academy for girls until the late 60s. It isn't particularly secluded, but more suburban. It sits up on a hill overlooking a highway. It has 5 floors in the new part of the building, 4 floors in the old convent and chapel wings. It was first opened in the 1890s by a religious order of nuns, particularly for young ladies who also wanted to be nuns. It grew out of that until eventually attendance dwindled, and it was sold to the state, who in turn converted it into a community college after almost a decade of disrepair. I'm not someone who dabbles in the occult or knows a lot about the supernatural. I mind my own business and try to do my job. But recently, this place has got me in rare form. I don't scare easily now. But just in the short time that I have worked here, I've started to think that something is up. The security cameras are typical CCTV cameras. No audio recordings. But in the monitor, I'll hear a crackling like static. There's no way to enable or disable audio on the monitor. It comes and goes. I'll hear footsteps like leather soles clopping down the hallways through the security monitor. When I go on patrols in the convent wing, the lockers that are typically reserved for the cleaning crew and faculty staff will be unlocked and wide open. I've seen them open on the cameras, but only my supervisor can play back the footage. Doors that I know I locked during my first patrol will then be unlocked and open on the third patrol. The motion sensors will detect something and turn on when I'm not even on that floor, and when I am, sometimes they don't even react to when I move down the hall. And when I go to what is now the library, it used to be the chapel, I can hear piano music coming from the hall where I had just came from. I don't really drink anymore. I don't do any drugs, prescribed or not. There's no history of mental illness, and this isn't just a one-time thing. I'm not sure how to tell my supervisor about it without sounding mad or cowardly. I don't even know if I'm posting this in the right area. Only 4 more hours left in my shift, anyway. I come from the county where Ireland's most haunted house, Loftus Hall, is located. If you want to know the history of Loftus Hall and the original story to it, I'm sure you can find it on Google. People that have visited all have their own stories of experiences at the house, and I'm going to share with you some of my experiences that I've had over the years. I lived about a 30 minutes drive away from it, so it was a destination that we visited a lot. I remember the first time I visited the grounds of the house. I was maybe 5 or 6 years old and was visiting it with my uncle. As we drove up the long lane leading the way to the house, I remember looking at all of the windows and getting a shiver as we approached. We parked and got out of the car. I stood and stared at the house. We walked around the grounds and around to the side of it where, at the time, there were apple trees. We picked some of them, as they were red and juicy, and put them in a bag to bring them home with us. When we got home and got the apples out of the bag, every single one had a rotten part on one side. I mean, a big, green, soft, gooey lump on all of them. Another time, when I was around 14, I had went to Loftus Hall with my friend and his mom. There's a nearby lighthouse that's open for people to visit, and we went there first. When we got to the house, there were a few people around, and a young American family there. A mom, dad, and 2 girls, aged around 5 and 9-ish. The 2 girls were running around and playing on the grounds when they ran to their parents laughing, and the 9-year-old said, Mommy, Ann wants to show us something. Can we go to her room?" Now this may seem like normal child behavior, but Anne is the name of the girl in the original haunting story of Loftus Hall. I must also mention that the actual house was not open for guests to go in and out of as they pleased. Not at that time. When I was 16, that was my first time going into the house. We booked a tour on Halloween night. There were some ghost hunters who do an overnight stay every year, and a certain amount of guests can stay there with them for the night. We arrived and went in. We set up our sleeping bags while the ghost hunter crew set up their equipment. We took the tour of the house at night with a tour guide and in groups of 5. We went to each room with the guide giving the story behind it. We got to a room called the Tapestry Room. This is the most famous and apparently most haunted room in the building. It's said that Anne was locked in this room, and she died in the room as she stared out the window waiting for her mysterious stranger to return. You can actually find the details of this story online. She was locked in there, and sat with her knees to her chin, and when she died, her body could not be straightened. Anyway, we entered this room and it was freezing. One of the guests in our group, now I don't know if they were paid actors or not, but one of the guests in our group collapsed and went into a fit, arms and legs flailing everywhere. An ambulance was called, and he was sent to the hospital. Apparently, it happens often that people collapse and have seizures once they enter that room. The house is situated on a cliff, and the sea is in the background. About 4 years ago, we went for a drive down there on a foggy evening, and we were looking out to the sea. As we did, we saw the outline of a ship. It looked like something out of the Pirates of the Caribbean, but it floated through the fog and vanished. There have been hundreds of encounters regarding this house that are recorded. Everyone has their own experiences from visiting, everything from feeling queasy in certain parts of the house, to seeing ghosts in the windows, to meeting people while on tours that nobody else who was on the same tour remembers. There's also a hole in the ceiling that goes through the roof, and this is where the devil flew through to escape from the house. Over the centuries, this hole has been repaired multiple times, but each time it is repaired, it will only last for a few days and then reopens again in the same place. The story I'm about to tell you takes place including myself, my mother, and my younger sister. We were in St. Francisville, Louisiana, staying at the infamous Myrtles Plantation. I'm aware that when it comes to touristy haunted places, the paranormal events that may occur there are questionable regarding the issue of their validity. As such, I tend to err on the side of caution with my own beliefs, and I always do a thorough check of wherever I'm staying. I keep a lookout for artificial motors, wires, basically anything that can cause things to happen that may seem paranormal. The cabin that we stayed in was clear. We arrived at the plantation around 2 p.m. that first day. We were given a complimentary tour of the grounds. I was getting vibes all over the place. It was pretty insane from the moment that I stepped foot on that soil, to be honest. I state the bit about getting vibes with emphasis on the fact that I do get vibes. Sometimes. Rarely. And never that strong. After the tour was finished, we were shown to our rooms, we were let in, and left to our own devices. I did my evaluation on the room, then afterward noticed that any time I neared the back door, I picked up on energy even more strongly than I had been during the tour of the rest of the grounds. I just felt that something had happened there, and I knew that I had to find out what. It was about 5 p.m. by that point, and understandably, we were getting pretty hungry. We left the plantation to go into town and get some dinner. We got back around 6:30, and were walking back over to our cabin when a friendly woman that we'd seen earlier walked over to us. She asked if we wanted to see her room. It was located in the actual plantation house, whereas we were staying in what would have originally been one of the slave cabins. We said yes, of course, so she took us up there. We looked around, and at first there was nothing noticeable as far as feelings or energy goes. Then I went into the bathroom. It was the most awful, oppressive atmosphere in there. It was creepy and terrible, and I hated it instantly. I just wanted to leave. I didn't necessarily think that something had happened there, rather that something inhabited that space. And I knew that it was not something kind. We didn't stay very long. Maybe 15-20 minutes later, we went back to our cabin and settled in for the night. Lots of vibes in that cabin, and my sister and I, we were somewhat younger at the time, shared a bed because we were scared. We stayed up late playing a game. When midnight rolled around, we decided that it was probably best to put it away and go to bed. As soon as we had put the game up and silence set in, however, I noticed a sound. The rocking chair on the front porch was creaking as it moved. Backward, forward, backward, forward. Hard enough that I could be certain that the wind was not responsible. I freaked out a little bit, but decided that I wasn't going to mention it to my sister. It would probably just scare her. We laid down for the night. She got to sleep quick. I, on the other hand, was having sleep issues. Nothing but thoughts and worries running through my mind. The moment I heard footsteps on the stones outside of our cabin, though, all of those pesky voices became irrelevant. Keep in mind, our cabin was fenced in, so it couldn't have been anyone who didn't have the key. Regardless, I heard the footsteps, and they continued as I heard the light slapping sounds of feet on the wooden porch along with the groan of someone's weight. They continued forward, right through the door, and I heard as whoever it was passed right by my bed. The whole time, I saw nothing. The footstep sounds made their way across the room to the wall, then out the back door. I will say that while I saw nothing, I did smell something. It was as though someone were wearing rosehip perfume, trailing the scent along behind them everywhere they walked. This event took place at about 1 a.m. Already having trouble getting to sleep, I didn't rest until 2.5 hours later, approximately 3:30 a.m. When we got up the next day, we went into the main house for breakfast, where we heard stories from other campers about their experiences. Theirs were equally intriguing, including people who felt a presence sit down on their bed in the middle of the night, and a person coming out of a cabin to tell people to be quiet. Yet the cabin in question was totally devoid of anyone alive. We ate, shared our stories, and returned to our cabin. We sat there for a while playing games on our tablets, just relaxing really, as it was a nice room despite its history and the fact that it was haunted. I can't remember why, but my sister and Mom got into an argument. The disagreement obviously didn't sit well with whatever spirits were occupying the cabin, because they were both interrupted by the faucet in the bathroom being turned on full force and then back off again. It startled all three of us. We cleared out of the cabin in less than 30 seconds after that. That is the end to my Myrtles Plantation story. I am never going to forget how terrifying that it was to be awake by myself in a cabin in the middle of nowhere and suddenly realize that you are not alone. So, since my medication changed, I haven't been experiencing sleep paralysis that much anymore. But for years, I've had it on a constant basis, nearly every day. I can elaborate on the neurological stuff behind sleep paralysis, but basically, it's very related to stress, anxiety, and a bad sleep schedule. Anyway, I usually don't have auditory or visual hallucinations during sleep paralysis. But almost during every episode, I experience the feeling of leaving my body. I wake up in my bed without being able to move, and I feel my body start to float, accompanied by this awful fear that at any time I might fall down and die. Sometimes I even get to actually see my own body sleeping on my bed from above. But it's always hazy, and I can't actually make out any of my physical features. I simply know that it's me on the bed. At other times, I have the same feeling of leaving my body, but instead of floating, it's something pulling me by the feet and dragging me out of my bed. I don't see anyone. It's just the feeling of being dragged. I would love to know if anyone else has experienced this during sleep paralysis. Is this merely a symptom of it? Or could I really be having an out-of-body experience? I'm Catholic, but not very religious at all, so I'm wondering about other spiritual possibilities. I work at a mental health facility. Strange things happen a lot, like doors closing and opening, seeing things out of the corner of your eye. You know, normal, creepy hospital stuff. Well, I had the creepiest experience. One night about a year ago, I'm working on the adolescent unit, night shift. I just saw something move out of the corner of my eye. Then immediately afterward, this girl comes running out of her room screaming that the devil comes at 3:33. She's just repeating it over and over again. We get her some meds, and she goes back to sleep. The next night, it happens again. This time I look back at the clock, and it is in fact 3:33. They don't have clocks in their rooms, and they can't have watches, so there's no way that she knew what time that it was. We played back the camera, and she just went from dead asleep to balls to the wall. So this girl does this every single night for her entire stay, which was about 5 days. During that time, the quote-unquote creepy hospital stuff seemed to happen even more. Random door buzzers were going off. Doors were opening and closing, lights were flickering. That creepy being watched, hair sticking up on your neck feeling was happening all the time. Every day she would say that she didn't remember getting up, and had no idea what we were talking about. About a week afterward, she got transferred to a long-term facility. I get called to receive a report for a patient that was being sent to us. I'm reading through the notes, and at the very end, quote-unquote, parents report patient repeatedly says that the devil comes at 3:33. I check the name to see if it's the same girl. It wasn't. I called the on-call physician, and he immediately declined the patient. To this day, all the staff have no idea what happened. This story took place when I was a kid. My dad has been a pool man for many years. One of his oldest customers decided to purchase a ranch. I don't exactly remember where. He asked my dad if he could come and fix their pool, which was disastrously maintained before he bought it. He gave my dad permission to bring us along, and told us that we were welcome to stay a few days to enjoy the ranch. We drove there, and I had been in charge of reading the MapQuest instructions because I never seemed to be able to sleep during car trips. We drove back home a few days later, after my dad was finally able to save the pool. The drive home was very long. For endless stretches, the view was mostly desert, farms, and the occasional small suburban town. Unlike me, my mom and brothers were knocked out almost immediately. So most of the trip, it was just my dad and I talking or listening to music. I'm also a very avid reader, so I had a book on my lap beside the maps. I remember the ride had been quiet for a while because I had been reading. I had to stop because it was getting dark, and my dad would only let me turn on the dome lights to read the maps. No radio service, and the Game Boy batteries had all died. All I had left to do was stare out the window. All of a sudden, I spotted a very tall shadow on a roof. I realized that there was a man who seemed to be wearing a hat, bowler or top hat, dancing and jumping from rooftop to rooftop of this suburban lot. It was kind of like the scene from Singing in the Rain, which, at that point, I had not yet seen myself. It took a second for me to realize that this was not a normal thing to observe. The houses were separated in a way where a normal person couldn't possibly have jumped from roof to roof the way that thing was. What scared me the most is how at the last house before a field he seemed to turn around and sense me. He bowed and tipped his hat. Even though I couldn't see it, I could also sense that he was smiling. All I felt was dread. I turned to my dad to see if he had also seen it, but he had of course been paying attention to the road. When I looked back, I couldn't see the houses anymore. They were way behind us. I never saw a face or any details. He was just a silhouette on the roofs. I remember the feeling of being afraid that it would follow us. That it could, if it wanted to. I never saw something like that on our many road trips ever again. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined it, but it felt so real. The memory is so vivid as well, which always comes back when I'm watching old musicals because the dancing reminds me of the way that he moved. This happened to me a few months ago, and just once. I was sleeping on my couch when I was suddenly in a paralysis state. I couldn't move no matter what I did. As I was trying to move, I heard a female voice laughing in my ear. I couldn't see them, but I clearly heard that they were laughing. I tried to scream, but couldn't let out a sound. Then I woke up, a little sweaty and terrified. My heart was pumping so much that it hurt my ears. I looked everywhere, but saw no one. I didn't go back to sleep after this, because this wasn't my first experience, and I realized if I go to sleep again, the same thing would happen. This was the first time I ever experienced something terrified, so I didn't risk it, and stayed up all night. Ever since, I've never had an experience like this one again. I should also mention that I live in a house that gives off a terrible vibe and has a history of violence. The poor house suffered from an abusive family. It's possible that this house brings out the worst in people, because my mom unfortunately lost herself. She was now abusive and worse. She was a kind woman who didn't want any problems, but unfortunately we had an abusive parent figure. But save that story for another time. The first and only time I've ever seen a ghost, a dead person, a demon, whatever you want to call it, was exactly 1 year ago today. I had just gotten my bachelor after 3 years of studying social welfare and was now working at a group home for teens with substance use problems. My workplace was in a big old house, which was almost scary quiet during the nighttime, and I often felt anxious being there. Don't get me wrong, I really enjoyed the job and spending time with the teens, but working nights scared the crap out of me. I usually started my shift around 8 p.m. Around that time we often made dinner. I helped out with homework, and we talked for hours dealing with all sorts of issues until I went to bed, usually around 1 a.m., and this was one of those days. I fell asleep at 1:30, woke up 2 hours later like I usually do to get a glass of water. I walked down the stairs, entered the common room, and then walked by a big window in the living room. I looked up at the gray, cloudy sky when I saw death hanging in a tree. Brown, rotten flesh in the shape of a face. I rubbed my eyes and then looked again, and the flesh was still there. I couldn't move, breathe, or blink my eyes for a few seconds. I was absolutely terrified. After a while, I found the strength to move my legs and walked into the office again. I locked the door and sat there all night, and when the sun finally peeked out, I managed to move my legs to go and look out the window again. There was no rotten flesh this time, just a normal tree with green leaves. A few days later after this incident, I told my boss that I didn't want to work night shifts anymore since the lack of sleep. I didn't want to tell her the real reason, since she would probably think that I was mad. Maybe I was. And what if this was just a nightmare? Probably. But what if it wasn't? Last night, my boyfriend went into the room next to our bedroom to play video games while I watched Parks and Rec on my phone on low volume in bed. After an hour or so, he ran in and asked, "Is everything okay?" I stared blankly at him. "Yeah? Why?" He then said he'd heard someone wailing, loudly, and that it sounded like my voice. It couldn't have been Parks and Rec, because I wasn't watching an episode with any sound in it like that, not to mention that the volume was too low to be heard in the other room. It couldn't have been me because I was just chilling. Additionally, I had not heard any wailing sound at all. He said he'd heard it through his gaming headphones a couple of times, wasn't quite sure what it was, took them off, heard it a third time clearly, and then came to check on me. This is strange because a few nights before, I was feeling incredibly ill with severe chills to the point where I couldn't leave the blankets to get more blankets. I was calling for help, and he heard nothing through his headphones. They're pretty good at canceling outside noise, plus he plays the game music at high volume. So who was the wailing woman? I want to preface this by saying that I am incredibly skeptical when it comes to anything about the supernatural. I tend not to trust anything without scientific evidence. That being said, these experiences I cannot explain away. Beginning in 2014, early 2015, I worked in offshore Louisiana and lived in St. Bernard Parish where I'd rented a home. My younger sister and her 3 children were also living with me, as she and her husband were having marital problems and had separated. I was only home half the month because my job required me to be out for a week, then home for a week. Whenever I was home, my sister would tell me weird things were happening to her and her kids. She couldn't describe it, but had decided that it was paranormal, as many of us do when faced with something that we can't explain. She told me things were happening like locked doors flying open, then closing again. That if anyone was taking a shower, the lights in the bathroom would flicker on and off the entire time. I chalked it up to her having anxiety about being alone in the house. One night, as I lay in bed, however, I felt a weight pressing down on my legs. I assumed that it was my sister or one of my nephews. I raised up, half asleep, certain that I was about to see the face of a child staring back at me. Instead, all I saw was the concave indentation at the foot of my bed, indicating that something was on it. Whatever it was halfway on my legs and halfway on the mattress, as if it were straddling me. I was completely exhausted from the prior weekend, too tired to react more, moved my feet. As I pulled my legs up into a kind of fetal position, it did occur to me that moving them was difficult. It was almost as if a full-grown man were sitting on top of them. The room I was sleeping in, I had chosen because it had its own bathroom. Later that night, I got up to go in there and could have sworn that I heard a male voice saying, "Get out." It was immediately followed by a loud bang from the kitchen. Nervous, I tiptoed in the direction of the sound. I used my phone's flashlight to navigate, taking care not to wake my sister and her kids who were sleeping in a room close to the kitchen. She had also heard the noise, though, and had come out to see what it was. My garbage can, which was under the sink, had been thrown across the room where it landed beside the television in the living room. Seconds later, my oldest nephew came sprinting from their room, crying and screaming that someone was in there with him and had pushed him and his sister off of the bed. I ran to the room where my sister and kids were, hoping to see nothing. Before I could make it through the doorway, though, I was knocked off of my feet by an unseen punch to my chest. Suddenly, everything we had sitting on the island in the kitchen began flying in every which direction. I got to my feet, yelling at my sister to help me get the babies. With one of the boys in my arms, I ran to my room to grab my phone and car keys. As we entered, every single item that I had in the room was laying on the floor in a big pile. Books, bedding, even my television, which was attached to the wall. Needless to say, we got out of there fast. We completely moved out the very next day. While packing up our stuff, I called the homeowner and told him that we were leaving. When I gave him my reason, I expected him to laugh hysterically at me. He didn't. He wasn't surprised at all. I'm sure he's either been through it himself or had another renter prior to me who had the same encounters. I've never experienced anything like that before or since. My sister and I never spoke of it again. Anyway, that's my haunted story. Stay safe, everyone. I work night shift on a unit at a nursing home. I hear and see a lot of weird things, but nothing much with meaning. Me and the other aide were walking down my hall to go check on a fall risk resident when we got in front of the door to an empty room that stays locked. The resident had moved home and no one had been in there since mid-October. I heard 3 distinct knocks coming from inside the room on the door as soon as we walked by. I froze and turned around, and without speaking looked at my friend, waiting for her to say if she had heard it as well, and when she did, I was frozen in fear, knowing that I was not alone in hearing things. Lots of little extra things have also happened. Me and another aide walked by a room when we got bad vibes. It was cracked open an inch, and the door slammed shut suddenly, so hard that it shook the floor. Right next to the room with the knocks, we had a resident pass away. Again, me and an aide walked by. The door was closed and locked, and the handle started jiggling hard and fast. Another time, me and an aide heard snarling growls coming from the dining room all night. The same night when the knocks occurred. There were also instances of running faucets in the residents' bathrooms, in the basement. Anywhere that I went had a resident complaining of water running all night.